How long to cut macrame cords is one of the most frequently asked questions, and I have broken it down to the simplest steps I could think of to try and help you with that problem. But if you end up making a wall hanging and your cords are too short, I do have a solution for you. But how about first we just try to estimate the cord length correctly the first time so we don't have to use that method. I'm really sorry to tell you that you are going to have to do some math here, but again, I'm trying to make it as little math as possible. I've made these two little wall hangings and they're to help show you exactly how I did this. So I did these examples using the most common knots, the square knot and the double half hitch knot. I did one example where I did full coverage of the wall hanging of both knots, and I did another example where I covered the wall hanging half of it with the knots. And I made all the lengths to start 50 centimeters, so it's easy to do the calculation and easy to recognize the differences. When the wall hanging was covered 100% with square knots, I did the knotting until there was only 7 centimeters of cord that wasn't knotted. This is how you figure out how much cord you've used up. You take the amount of cord used for the knots, which is 43 centimeters, and you divide it by the length of the knotted area, which is 14 centimeters, and you get 3.1. So that means if you did a wall hanging using the same cord I'm using, which is 4mm cord, and you do your knots the same way as me, so the same tightness or looseness, which is why I recommend you kind of do this little exercise for yourself so you know what it is for you, because you'll be more precise. For me, it's 3.1 times. So say I wanted to do a wall hanging where I had 1 meter of square knots covering the whole thing. That would mean I would have to cut each length 3.1 meters. But there's a hitch. You attach your cord with the lark's head knot, so you're folding the cord in half, which means you need to double it. The 3.1 times 100 would make it 3.1 meters or 310 centimeters. Double it because you're folding it over with the lark's head knot, so now that's 620 centimeters. Then say you want to have a 50 centimeter fringe. Well, you have to add that on too and double it. So the 50 centimeters times 2 is another 100. So now we're at what? We had 620, now we're at 720. Another thing to consider is how much cord it's taking to attach your cord to the dowel. For this little project, my dowel is really thin. It only used 12 centimeters of cord. But if you're using a really thick dowel, you might want to figure out how much that dowel takes to make the lark's head knot and add that onto your numbers. So the calculation is the length of the knotted area times the multiplier, which for this instance is 3.1. Then add to that number how long you want your fringe. So now you have that number, multiply it by 2. And that's the length of the cord you want to attach with the lark's head knot. But consider adding some extra length for the lark's head knot. And then I always add just a little bit more just for good measure. This math equation is the only one you need to know, but the numbers are just going to change. So for the double half hitch where I did complete coverage, I used 44 centimeters of the cord. So there was 6 centimeters at the end that was not knotted. And then the length of the knotted section was 7 centimeters. To figure out the multiplier, you take the 44 centimeters that you used to make the knots, and then you divide it by the length of the knotted section. So that's 44 divided by 7, and that gives you 6.3. So when you start your project, you know how long you want this knotted section to be, and say it's completely going to be covered with the double half hitch knot. You'd take that length of section, say it was 10 centimeters, you'd multiply it by 6.3, so then you'd have 63 centimeters. Then you'd add how much fringe you wanted, say it was 10 centimeters, so now you'd add that on, so you'd have 73 centimeters. You double it, so now you have 146 centimeters. And then you add a little bit of extra for your lark's head knot, and then a little more for good measure. I hope this is making sense. So for the other examples, I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but for covering 50% of the wall hanging with square knots, I got a multiplier of 2.3. And for the double half hitch knot, covering half of it with double half hitches, I got a multiplier of 4.3. Same math equation, right? So you want to do a 100 centimeter tall knotted section of square knots, but just 50% of it covered with square knots. Then you'd multiply it by 2.3, add your fringe, double it, add a little more for lark's head knot, and a little more for good measure. But say you want to do a wall hanging that's half covered in knots, half of the knots are square knots, half of the knots are double half hitch knots, well then use a number in between. So half coverage, I've got 2.3 for the square knot and 4.3 for the double half hitch knot. So use the multiplier right in between, 3.3. So you have a 100 centimeter length that you want knotted, multiply that by 3.3, add your fringe length, multiply by 2, add a bit for the lark's head knot, and a little more for good measure. Here are all the multipliers. Feel free to screenshot it for future reference. So this calculation works for 4mm cord. And use the numbers that I have, experiment with it, that's great. But if I was to use thicker cord, these numbers would change because thicker cord, the same knot uses a little bit more length. Just like a thinner cord, when you do the same knot, it uses a little bit of less length. And this is why I kind of suggest you do this exercise for yourself, because I use 4mm cord a lot. So knowing these numbers for 4mm cord is great. And then I know, oh, I'm using 5mm, I'll add 20%. Oh, I'm using 6mm, I'll add 40%. Another tip I have for you is to take notes while you do your projects. I always note down the thickness of the cord I'm using, the length of cuts I do, and then at the end, did I have extra cord? Did I have less cord? Draw a little sketch of your piece. This is really great to have a reference to look back on and be like, how much cord did I use for that piece? Or how long were the cords? Anyways, just a suggestion for you. Here's an example of a bigger project that I did. I have it all sketched out. I calculated my cord lengths and then I made notes because some of my cord lengths were too short and I had to add length, which I'm going to show you how to do in a second. And some of them were too long, so I wasted more cord than I wanted to. So if I were to make that piece again with the same cord, I would know exactly how long to cut my cords. I mentioned I was going to give you a solution if your cords end up being too short mid-project. So I have a tutorial on how to add cord for the double half hitch knot and a tutorial for how to add cord for the square knot. So here's the double half hitch knot and here's the square knot. I really hope I've been able to explain this well and that you have a better understanding on how to estimate your cord lengths.